Ethan Cole, a wealthy and arrogant man, agreed to a bet that would change his life in ways he never expected. He was used to winning in business and in life, and competition fueled him. But when his close friend and rival Damien made a bold challenge at a lavish New York charity gala, Ethan was intrigued. Damien smirked and threw out the challenge. "Let's see if you can win this one, Ethan. I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type." Ethan, known for dating glamorous women, was taken aback but always eager to prove himself. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "And what's the prize?" With a mischievous grin, Damien raised his champagne glass and said, $5 million to the winner. But you have to marry her and stay married for at least 6 months. Ethan, feeling the rush of competition and the appeal of a financial challenge, agreed without hesitation. "My beautiful family, let's start with a blessing. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now, let us begin." The woman Damien had in mind was Amara Thompson, someone who didn't fit conventional beauty standards. Ethan didn't know her, but to him, it was just another deal to win. Days later, Ethan received more details about Amara through a portfolio from his assistant. She was confident, independent, and strong-willed, nothing like the women Ethan was used to. This intrigued him even more. Used to being in control, he wondered how he would handle someone who wouldn't bend to his will. Their first meeting took place at his luxurious office, under the pretense of funding her youth project. When Amara arrived, Ethan immediately noticed how different she was from anyone he had ever met. She didn't seem intimidated by the opulent setting or by Ethan himself. Instead, she met his gaze with firm confidence. "You must be Ethan Cole," Amara said directly as she sat down. "And you must be Amara Thompson," Ethan replied with a controlled smile, extending his hand. She hesitated briefly before shaking it with a strong grip, showing her determination. "Let's not beat around the bush," Amara began, her tone straightforward. "I know why we're here. I know about the bet, the terms, and the conditions." Ethan was surprised by her bluntness, but didn't show it. "And yet you still agreed to meet?" he asked, curious about her motivations. Amara paused for a moment before answering. "Let's just say I have my reasons. I'm not naive, Ethan. 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken." Ethan smiled. Amara was proving to be more of a challenge than he had anticipated, which only made things more interesting for him. As their first meeting ended, Ethan found himself increasingly intrigued by Amara. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. She wasn't afraid of him, and that piqued his curiosity, even admiration. Days passed, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how to approach the next step. He was used to being the master of the game, but now it seemed Amara had her own moves. Their second meeting took place at a simple community center, a far cry from the glamorous offices Ethan usually frequented. Amara had suggested the spot, and Ethan, curious, agreed. He wanted to understand who she was, and why she had agreed to what seemed like a temporary contract of marriage. When Ethan arrived, Amara was already there, sipping tea with a calm smile. She greeted him warmly, without the coldness of their first encounter, but still carried herself with that same unshakable confidence. "I thought you preferred high-rise boardrooms," Amara teased as Ethan sat down. Sometimes it's good to break the routine, Ethan replied, trying to sound casual, though he felt slightly out of his element. They chatted for a while, exchanging surface-level details, but Amara quickly got to the point. If we're really going through with this, I want to make a few things clear, Amara said, placing her cup of tea on the table. I'm not interested in your money or your luxury lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and I plan on walking away from this exactly the same as I entered. Ethan watched her carefully. He knew she was being honest. Amara was the type of woman who knew what she wanted, and clearly marriage wasn't something she saw as a way to climb the social ladder like many others might. So what do you want, Amara? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Freedom, she answered without hesitation. I want you to know that even though we're entering into this agreement, I won't be controlled by you. I have my own life, and that's not going to change because of a temporary marriage. Ethan smiled. It wasn't the answer he expected, but at the same time, he didn't mind granting Amara this freedom. To him, marriage was just a formality to win the bet. If she wanted to keep her independence, it wouldn't bother him. Fine, Ethan agreed. 6 months after that, we go our separate ways. Amara watched him for a moment, as if wanting to be sure he really agreed to the terms. She had accepted this challenge with a plan in mind, and was determined to ensure everything went according to her wishes. Deep down, she knew Ethan might try to manipulate the situation, but she also trusted her own strength to resist his influence. The meeting ended on friendly terms, with both leaving with their roles clearly defined. Amara would keep her independence, and Ethan would ensure that the marriage was nothing more than a formality. But as the days passed and the wedding date approached, Ethan couldn't help but feel that maybe this game wasn't as simple as he had imagined, especially with Amara's quiet dignity hinting at secrets he hadn't yet uncovered. In the sleek, glass-walled office atop his Manhattan tower, Ethan Cole reclined in his leather chair, the city skyline glittering like a trophy behind him. He twirled a pen between his fingers, his mind replaying the community center meeting with Amara. Her calm defiance, that unshakable confidence, it gnawed at him. She wasn't supposed to be a challenge. This was supposed to be a transaction, a checkmark on his way to Damien's $5 million. Yet her words lingered. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken. He smirked, dismissing the unease. A game was a game, and Ethan Cole always won. Clara, he called, his voice sharp but casual, as if summoning a barista instead of his overworked assistant. Clara, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bob, appeared at the door, tablet in hand. She'd been with Ethan long enough to know his moods. Today's was predatory. Yes, Mr. Cole, she said, her tone clipped but professional. I need a candidate for this charitable endeavor, Ethan said, leaning forward, elbows on his polished desk. Someone unassuming. Someone who won't ask too many questions about my generosity. You know, for the mentorship program. He air-quoted the last words, a smirk tugging at his lips. The mentorship program was a convenient cover, a way to sell the bet to the public as philanthropy while he played his part. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. I'll pull the files from the applicants. Women who've applied for funding through the Cole Foundation. Anyone specific in mind? Ethan waved a hand dismissively. Surprise me. Just make sure she's ordinary. Someone who'll see me as a savior, not a puzzle. Clara hesitated, her fingers pausing over her tablet. You sure about this, Mr. Cole? Playing with people's lives. It's not a spreadsheet you can balance later. Ethan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Clara, I pay you to organize, not to lecture. Get me the files. She gave a curt nod and left, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Ethan leaned back, his mind already spinning. This was a performance, nothing more. He'd charm the woman, seal the deal, and walk away richer, both in dollars and in bragging rights. Damien's bet was a dare, and Ethan didn't lose at dares. An hour later, Clara returned with a stack of folders, each containing a profile from the mentorship program applicants. She set them on his desk with a deliberate thud. Here's the shortlist. I vetted them for discretion, as you requested. Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused by her tone. You sound like you're delivering bad news. Clara didn't smile. Just read them. He flipped open the first folder, skimming through photos and bios. A schoolteacher from Brooklyn. A nurse from Queens. A librarian with a penchant for knitting. All perfectly fine, but none sparked the right mix of opportunity and ease. Then he reached the last file. The photo clipped to it stopped him cold. Amara Thompson. Dark-skinned, heavy-set, with glasses that framed her warm brown eyes. Her smile was shy but steady, like someone who'd seen enough to know her worth. The bio listed her as a community social worker from Harlem, running a youth center on a shoestring budget. Her application was for funding to expand after-school programs. Simple. Earnest. Ordinary. She looks kind, Ethan said, his voice low, almost mocking. Kind people are easy. Clara shifted, her arms crossing. Don't underestimate people like her, Mr. Cole. Kind doesn't mean weak. Ethan chuckled, ignoring the warning. He tapped the photo with his pen, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She's perfect. Set up a meeting. Tell her I'm interested in funding her little project. Little project? Clara echoed, her brow arching. She's kept that center running through budget cuts and gang turf wars. She's not just some. Clara, Ethan cut in, his tone final. Make the call. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and left, her disapproval hanging in the air like static. Ethan didn't care. Clara was efficient but sentimental, always fussing over details he didn't have time for. Amara Thompson was the ideal mark, grateful, unassuming, and unlikely to dig into his motives. He'd play the benevolent millionaire, dazzle her with promises, and have her saying, I do, before she knew what hit her. He flipped open her file again, scanning the details. Born and raised in Harlem. Single. No criminal record. A degree in social work from a state college. A father who died years ago. Some construction worker. Probably irrelevant. Everything about her screamed safe bet. Yet that smile in the photo, that quiet confidence, tugged at something in him. He shook it off. She was a means to an end, nothing more. The next day, Ethan arranged the meeting at his office, deliberately choosing the setting to impress. The Cole Foundation's headquarters was a monument to his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art worth millions, and a desk that screamed power. He'd worn his best suit, a tailored navy number that made women linger. When Amara arrived, he was ready to charm. She stepped into the room, and Ethan's first thought was that she didn't belong here. Not in a bad way, just different. Her floral dress was modest, her shoes slightly worn, but she carried herself with a grace that didn't match the setting. No nerves, no awe. Just a calm, grounded presence that made the room feel smaller. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice warm but steady. Thank you for taking the time to see me. Ethan flashed his trademark smile, the one that closed deals and opened hearts. Please call me Ethan. I think you and I could do great things together. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I'm here about the youth center. We're trying to expand our programs, keep kids off the streets. Your foundation could make a real difference. Her sincerity was almost disarming, but Ethan leaned into his role. I'm all about making a difference, Amara. Tell me more. She did, her passion for her work spilling out in measured, thoughtful words. Ethan nodded, feigning interest, but his mind was elsewhere. She was perfect, earnest, trusting, and just desperate enough to believe his intentions were pure. He'd fund her project, pull her into his orbit, and propose before the month was out. Easy. As the meeting wrapped, he stood, extending a hand. "I'll have my team draw up the paperwork. I think this could be the start of something special." Amara's eyes flickered, as if catching something in his tone, but she shook his hand firmly. "I hope so, Ethan. I don't take promises lightly." The words landed heavier than he expected, but he brushed it off, escorting her to the door with a smile. As she left, he returned to his desk, the city skyline stretching out before him like a chessboard. He'd made his first move. Alone now, Ethan picked up Amara's file again, her headshot staring back at him. That smile, soft, unguarded, almost innocent, felt like a quiet challenge. He leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You'll do," he said to the empty room, his voice dripping with confidence. But as he set the file down, the photo seemed to shift under the light, her eyes catching his with a knowing glint. It was just a trick of the angle, he told himself. Still, for a moment, the room felt less like his kingdom and more like the edge of a cliff. Ethan Cole sat behind his imposing desk, the Manhattan skyline framing him like a king on a throne. The bet with Damien was a game, and Amara Thompson was his chosen piece, carefully selected, perfectly positioned. He'd arranged this meeting to seal the deal, to dazzle her with charm and promises of funding. Yet, as the elevator dinged and the door to his office opened, he felt a flicker of anticipation he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the thrill of the chase, or maybe it was her, Amara, with her quiet dignity that hinted at secrets he hadn't yet uncovered. She stepped into the room, and Ethan's world tilted slightly. Her dress was simple, a soft floral pattern that seemed out of place against the sterile opulence of his office. Her shoes were worn, but her posture was straight, her smile warm and unassuming. She carried an energy that filled the space, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat. For a moment, Ethan forgot his script. "Mr. Cole," Amara said, her voice low and grounded, "thank you for taking the time to see me." Ethan snapped into character, flashing his practiced smile. "Please call me Ethan. I think you and I could do great things together." He gestured to the chair across from him, noting how she sat without hesitation, unfazed by the power dynamic he'd so carefully curated. Amara clasped her hands in her lap, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that made him pause. "I'm here about the youth center in Harlem," she began. "We mentor at-risk teens, kids who need someone to believe in them. A safe space, a second chance. Your foundation could help us expand, keep more of them off the streets." Her passion was palpable, her words weaving a vision of hope and grit. Ethan leaned forward, nodding attentively, but his mind was elsewhere. She was sincere, almost painfully so, and he saw it as naivety, a soft spot he could exploit. Fund her project, play the savior, and she'd be eating out of his hand in no time. Still, her intensity was disarming. He caught himself listening, actually listening, to her talk about kids who reminded her of herself at their age. "My father always believed the measure of a man is what he gives back," Amara said, her gaze steady. "He used to say it's not about what you have, but what you do with it." The words landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through Ethan's thoughts. His smile faltered for a split second, a vague unease stirring. Her father, who was he? The name in her file, Anthony Thompson, meant nothing to him, just another faceless worker from a forgotten project. He brushed it off, leaning back with a casual nod. "Wise man. I'm all about giving back, Amara. Let's make this happen." She studied him, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "I hope you mean that, Ethan." The meeting ended with promises of follow-ups, and Ethan watched her leave, her floral dress a stark contrast to the glass and steel of his world. She was perfect, earnest, trusting, and just desperate enough to believe his intentions. He'd won the first round. Over the next few weeks, Ethan played his part flawlessly. He sent flowers to the youth center, lavish bouquets that made the kids whistle and Amara roll her eyes. He invited her to lunches at upscale bistros, framing them as strategy sessions for her project. Each time, she arrived with that same quiet confidence, deflecting his flirtations with polite humor, but warming to his apparent generosity. "You don't have to keep buying me lunch," she teased once, spearing a piece of salmon with her fork. "The kids need books, not my fancy meals." "Then let me buy the books," Ethan shot back, his grin easy. "And maybe a coffee next time." She laughed, a sound that caught him off guard. Warm, unguarded, real. He found himself wanting to hear it again. Their interactions became a dance, a montage of moments that blurred the line between strategy and something else. A candlelit dinner at a rooftop restaurant, where Amara's stories of her teens made Ethan forget his usual banter. A walk through Central Park, where she stopped to help a kid with a scraped knee, her kindness so natural it left him silent. A late-night planning session at the youth center, where their laughter over pizza boxes felt strangely normal. Ethan was playing a role, but Amara's honesty, her refusal to fawn over his wealth or status, kept pulling him off script. He told himself it was the bet driving him, the $5 million dangling like a carrot. But sometimes, when she smiled or called him out on his arrogance, he wasn't so sure. 2 months in, Ethan decided it was time. He'd laid the groundwork, charmed her, funded her project, even attended one of her teen mentorship events, clapping awkwardly as the kids performed a spoken-word piece. Amara had watched him there, her expression soft but guarded, like she was waiting for something. He didn't know what, but he knew he needed to close the deal before Damien's deadline loomed. He chose a quiet evening at a harborfront restaurant, the kind with soft jazz and views of the city lights on the water. Amara arrived in a simple black dress, her glasses catching the candlelight. She looked different, not glamorous, but striking in her own way. Ethan felt a tug, quickly smothered by his focus on the bet. "Amara," he said, after the plates were cleared, his voice smooth but rehearsed. "These past weeks, you've shown me something real. Something I didn't know I was missing." He slid a velvet box across the table, a diamond ring glinting inside. "Marry me." Her eyes widened, just for a moment, before settling into that calm, unreadable gaze. She didn't touch the box, didn't gasp or blush like he'd expected. Instead, she leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "Ethan," she said softly, "that's a big step." "I know," he pressed, leaning closer, his charm dialed to maximum. "But I've never met anyone like you. You make me want to be better." The words were half true, and that surprised him. He did feel something. Her honesty, her strength, it was like a mirror he wasn't ready to face. But the bet was the goal, and he was so close. Amara studied him, her silence stretching long enough to make him shift in his seat. Then slowly she smiled, a quiet, almost wistful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll marry you." Ethan exhaled, triumph surging through him. He'd done it. The bet was in motion, the ring on her finger a glittering marker of his victory. But as he reached for her hand, something unreadable passed in her eyes. A flicker of knowing, of resolve. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that warm smile, but it left a chill in its wake. They toasted to their future, the clink of glasses echoing like a sealed contract. Ethan told himself it was just the bet, just the game. But as Amara's gaze held his, steady and unflinching, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't the only one playing. The restaurant's candlelight flickered across Amara's face as she said, "Yes," her quiet smile sealing Ethan Cole's triumph. He'd won the proposal, the first major move in Damien's bet, and the $5 million felt closer than ever. But that unreadable glint in her eyes lingered in his mind, a shadow he couldn't shake. As they left the harborfront, the city's lights reflecting on the water, Ethan told himself it was just the thrill of the game. Yet Amara's steady gaze felt like a chess piece he hadn't accounted for, and the board was starting to feel less like his own. The wedding was a spectacle, a media circus orchestrated with Ethan's signature flair. Held at a rooftop venue overlooking Manhattan, it was drenched in opulence. Crystal chandeliers, imported orchids, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance, their cameras flashing like vultures circling. Tabloids had already branded Amara, the plus-sized bride of Manhattan's playboy, their headlines dripping with mockery. Billionaire's charity stunt or true love. One screamed, Ethan Cole's unlikely match. Blared another. Social media was worse, dissecting Amara's weight, her race, her simple background with ruthless glee. Ethan reveled in it. The attention was performance art, proof of his untouchable status. He posed for photos with a megawatt smile, his arm around Amara, playing the smitten groom to perfection. "Let them talk," he told his publicist, grinning. "It's all part of the show." The bet required a believable marriage, and he was delivering, every headline a point in his favor. Amara, though, was a different story. She moved through the chaos with a grace that silenced rooms. Her wedding dress, a simple ivory gown she'd chosen herself, contrasted starkly with the extravagance around her. When a reporter shoved a microphone in her face, asking, "How does it feel to marry into wealth?" she smiled softly and said, "It feels like a new chapter. No bitterness, no defense, just quiet dignity that made the question seem small." Ethan watched her, half admiring, half perplexed. She wasn't playing the game, yet she was winning at something he didn't understand. In private, their new life together unfolded in a penthouse that screamed Ethan's wealth. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, art that cost more than most people's homes. Amara brought her own touch. A small vase of wildflowers on the kitchen counter, a stack of books about community organizing, a handwritten grocery list pinned to the fridge. She ran the household with the same calm authority she'd shown in their meetings, cooking meals that filled the space with warmth. Spiced stews, cornbread, dishes Ethan had never tasted growing up in his sterile, catered world. She'd leave notes on his bedside table. "Slept well? Coffee's ready." Or, "I'm praying for your peace." The gestures unsettled him, their sincerity a language he didn't speak. He'd expected clinginess, maybe gratitude for his lifestyle. Instead, she seemed to need nothing from him, and that made his role as the charming benefactor feel hollow. At night, lying in their separate bedrooms, part of their independent agreement, Ethan found himself replaying her words, her gestures. Her calmness was magnetic, a stark contrast to the women who'd chased his status or melted under his charm. He caught himself smiling at the memory of her teasing him over breakfast, her glasses slipping down her nose as she laughed. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. The bet was a performance, not a connection. Yet Amara's presence was seeping into him, a quiet tide eroding his carefully built walls. The world outside their penthouse wasn't as kind. At a dinner party hosted by one of Ethan's investors, the air was thick with champagne and veiled barbs. His friends, a circle of polished egos, couldn't resist the topic of his marriage. Over dessert, A hedge fund bro named Trevor leaned across the table, his smirk sharp. "Ethan, you really took one for the team, huh?" he said, gesturing toward Amara, who was chatting with a guest across the room. "I mean, props for the charity angle, but 6 months? That's commitment." The table erupted in laughter, and Ethan forced a chuckle, his jaw tight. It was the kind of jab he'd laughed off 100 times, but tonight it landed differently. He glanced at Amara, expecting her to shrink or deflect. Instead, she met his eyes from across the room, her gaze steady and piercing. No anger, no tears, just a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any comeback could. The room's chatter faded, and for a moment, it was just her stare, pinning him like a specimen under glass. Shame flickered in his chest, unfamiliar and sharp. Later, back at the penthouse, Ethan found Amara in their bedroom, packing a small duffel bag. Her movements were deliberate, her face calm but resolute. The sight jolted him, his usual confidence faltering. "Where are you going?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, trying to keep his tone light. "To my mother's," Amara said, folding a sweater without looking up. "You don't need to pretend anymore." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Pretend? What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his voice sharper than he intended. She paused, her hands still, and turned to face him. Her eyes were calm but firm, carrying that same unreadable depth he'd seen the night he proposed. "I know about the bet," she said simply. The words hit like a sucker punch. Ethan froze, his mind racing for a lie, a deflection, anything to regain control. "Amara, I don't." "Don't," she cut in, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "You think people like me don't hear things? Your assistant, Clara, she works with my cousin. I knew about the bet before I ever walked into your office. The terms, the prize, all of it." Ethan's mouth went dry. He'd been played, not by Damien, not by the media, but by her. The woman he'd dismissed as naive had seen through him from the start. "Then why?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why go through with it?" Amara's gaze didn't waver. "Because I wanted to see if there was anything in you worth saving." Her words were soft, but they landed like a verdict. "You're not the only one who can play a game, Ethan. But mine wasn't about money." He stood there, speechless, as she zipped her bag and slung it over her shoulder. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Her calm, her strength, it wasn't naivety, it was power. And he'd underestimated it completely. As she walked toward the door, she paused, glancing back. "You laughed tonight," she said, her voice low. "You let them mock me, and you laughed. That's when I knew, you're still the man who thinks this is all a game." The door clicked shut behind her, and Ethan was alone, the penthouse's luxury mocking his emptiness. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own pride, cracking under the truth of her words. Amara's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. "I know about the bet," she had said, her voice calm but cutting. Ethan stood frozen in the penthouse doorway, his mind reeling as she shouldered her bag. The luxury around him, the marble, the views, the silence, felt like a cage now, trapping him with the echo of her revelation. He'd been the puppet master, or so he thought. But she'd known. All along she'd known. Ethan found his voice, hoarse and unsteady. "How long have you known?" Amara paused at the threshold, turning back with that unflinching gaze. "From the beginning," she replied, her tone even, without triumph or malice. "Just fact." He stepped forward, his hands clenching at his sides. "From the how?" "Damien wouldn't." "Your assistant's cousin works with my friend," Amara interrupted gently, as if explaining something simple. "Word travels in Harlem, Ethan. People talk. I knew about the bet before you even proposed. The $5 million, the 6 months, the challenge, to marry someone like me, someone you thought was beneath you. The truth slammed into him, a wave of shock that left him breathless. He'd scripted every move, every charm offensive, but she'd been reading from a different play. Her acceptance, her warmth, it wasn't naivety. It was strategy. Then why? He demanded, his voice cracking. Why go through with it? The wedding, the notes, the everything. Amara set her bag down for a moment, her eyes softening but not yielding. Because I wanted to see if there was anything in you worth saving. The words were the same as before, but now they carried weight, a quiet indictment. You live in this world of games and deals, Ethan. I thought maybe, just maybe, being close to someone real could change that. He shook his head, denial bubbling up. That's it? You married me out of pity? No, she said firmly. Not pity. Purpose. She took a breath, her composure cracking just enough to show the hurt beneath. My father, Anthony Thompson, he worked for your company. On one of your construction sites in the Bronx. There was an accident. Faulty equipment, rushed deadlines. He was injured, fired to cover it up, and he died a week later from complications. You destroyed my family's life and never apologized. Just lawyers and settlements to bury it all. Ethan's world tilted. Anthony Thompson. The name from her file, the one he'd skimmed and dismissed. Flashes came unbidden. A report years ago, a safety violation glossed over, a family's claim silenced with cash. He'd signed off on it, moved on, built his empire higher. Your father was Anthony Thompson, he whispered, the color draining from his face. Amara nodded, her voice steady but laced with old pain. Yes, the man you never even met. The one whose death was just paperwork to you. I saw your name on those documents, Ethan. When I heard about the bet, I realized this was my chance. Not for revenge, but to see if the man who ruined us could be more than that. If he could learn what giving back really means. Guilt crashed over him, raw and unrelenting. He'd mocked her kindness, used her as a prop, all while carrying the shadow of her loss. The bet, the laughs at the party, it all twisted into something ugly, a mirror reflecting his own emptiness. Amara, I didn't know. I mean, I knew about the accident, but... You knew enough, she cut in, her eyes flashing. You chose not to care. That's the difference. She picked up her bag again, her movements final. I gave you 6 months. I showed you grace, hoped you'd see it. But tonight, when you let your friends laugh and didn't say a word, that was my answer. Ethan reached out, desperate. Wait. Please. I can fix this. The bet, it's over. I'll call Damien, end it. Just stay. Amara's smile was sad, almost pitying. You can keep your bet, Ethan. I already won. She turned, the door opening to the hallway beyond. I won because I didn't let you break me. And maybe, just maybe, I planted something in you that'll grow. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Ethan alone in the vast penthouse. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hands trembling. Shock gave way to guilt, a deep, aching self-awareness he'd never allowed before. The man in the mirror, the winner, the untouchable, was a fraud. And for the first time, he wondered if he could change that. The click of the penthouse door as Amara left echoed in Ethan Cole's mind like a gavel. Her final words, "You can keep your bet, Ethan. I already won," cut deeper than any insult, exposing the hollow core of his carefully crafted world. He stood frozen in the bedroom, the opulence around him, marble floors, designer furniture, a skyline view worth millions, mocking his emptiness. The game was over, and he'd lost more than Damien's $5 million. He'd lost something he hadn't even known he had. Ethan spiraled in the days that followed. He avoided the office, ignored calls from his publicist, and let the tabloids churn their rumors unchecked. Mystery bride vanishes. Screamed one headline. Ethan Cole's charity stunt implodes. Crowed another. He didn't care. The penthouse, once a stage for his triumphs, became a prison. He poured whiskey into a crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching the dim light as he sank onto the couch. His eyes drifted to a framed wedding photo on the shelf. Amara's soft smile, his own smug grin. He'd been so sure of himself then, so blind. Memories of her flooded unbidden, sharp and vivid. The way she'd hum while cooking, filling the kitchen with the scent of spices he couldn't name. The note she left. Slept well? Coffee's ready. In her neat, looping handwriting. The time she'd caught him staring at her during a youth center event, her glasses slipping as she laughed at a teen's bad joke. She'd never mocked him, never thrown his arrogance in his face, even when he deserved it. Her patience, her kindness, it had been a gift he'd trampled. Ethan drained the glass, the burn doing nothing to dull the ache. Sleep eluded him, so he wandered the penthouse at night, replaying their moments together. A flashback hit hard. A rainy afternoon when Amara had dragged him to the youth center to meet her kids. He'd grumbled, expecting a photo op, but she'd handed him a paint roller and pointed to a peeling wall. "You want to help? Start here," she'd said, her smile teasing but warm. He'd painted alongside her, their elbows brushing, her laughter pulling him out of his usual armor. For a moment he'd felt human. Now, the memory twisted like a knife. She'd seen him, really seen him, and he'd let her walk away. Driven by a restless need for answers, Ethan found himself at his company's archives, a sterile basement vault beneath his Manhattan headquarters. It was past midnight, the building empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He hadn't been here in years. Paper trails were for lawyers, not winners. But Amara's words, "You destroyed my family's life and never apologized," had cracked something open. He needed to know. The file was buried in a box labeled Closed Cases, 2018. Thompson, Anthony. Construction incident, Bronx site. The pages were cold in his hands, the ink faded but damning. A safety report detailed faulty scaffolding, ignored warnings, rushed deadlines to cut costs. Ethan's signature was scrawled at the bottom of a memo approving the budget cuts. He'd been 29, hungry to prove himself, dismissing the risks as acceptable. Anthony Thompson, a father of two, had fallen 20 feet when the scaffold collapsed. Fired to avoid liability, he died a week later from internal injuries. The settlement, $50,000, had been a line item Ethan barely remembered signing. He sank into a chair, the file trembling in his hands. The truth was worse than he'd imagined. It wasn't just negligence, it was his negligence. His ambition. His choice. Amara's face flashed in his mind, her quiet strength, her pain, and guilt clawed at him, raw and relentless. He'd built his empire on bodies like her father's, and she'd known it all along. Days blurred into weeks. Ethan stopped drinking, the whiskey bottle gathering dust. Instead, he acted. Quietly, methodically, he began repairing the damage he'd ignored for years. He tracked down families affected by the Bronx project, paying off medical debts and back wages from his personal account. He rehired workers laid off during his cost-cutting years, ensuring fair contracts. Most of all, he funneled money into Amara's youth center, anonymously, through a shell foundation. No press releases, no photo ops. Just checks cashed and resources delivered, new computers, art supplies, a renovated gym. He tried reaching out to her, leaving voicemails that went unanswered, texts that sat unread. He drove to the youth center once, lingering across the street, but she wasn't there. The kids' laughter drifted out, and he imagined her inside, guiding them with that steady warmth. He didn't go in. He didn't deserve to. One night, sitting in the penthouse, Ethan realized something had shifted. He wasn't chasing Amara's forgiveness anymore. He wasn't even chasing the bet, which felt like a distant, childish thing now. He was chasing peace, a quiet he'd never known, one Amara had shown him in glimpses. Her notes, her grace, her belief that he could be more, they'd planted something in him, just as she'd said. In the bathroom, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the untouchable millionaire he'd cultivated. His eyes were tired, his jaw unshaven, his arrogance stripped away. For the first time, he saw himself clearly, not as a winner, but as a man who'd hurt people and could still make it right. "No more bets," he whispered to the mirror, the words a vow. The reflection didn't flinch, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the weight lift, just a fraction. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a start. The penthouse mirror had become Ethan Cole's confessor, reflecting a man he barely recognized. His whispered vow, "No more bets," had marked a shift, a crack in the armor of his arrogance. Months had passed since Amara's departure, each day a quiet battle to rebuild what he'd broken. The guilt over her father's death, the shame of his laughter at that dinner party, the weight of her knowing gaze, they haunted him, but they also drove him. He'd started repairing the damage, not for her forgiveness or the headlines, but for the peace she'd shown him was possible. Yet peace remained elusive, and Amara's absence was a wound that refused to close. It was a crisp autumn evening when Ethan found himself at a community center in Harlem, drawn by a flyer for Amara's annual charity event. He'd seen it on a bulletin board during one of his anonymous deliveries to her youth center, a fundraiser for at-risk teens, her passion project. He went, uninvited, unannounced, blending into the crowd with a plain jacket and cap, no trace of the polished millionaire. The room buzzed with warmth. Kids performing spoken-word poetry, volunteers serving food, Amara at the center of it all. She moved with that same quiet dignity, her smile lighting up the space as she hugged a shy teen who'd just read a poem. Ethan watched from the back, his chest tight. She was a force, and he'd been too blind to see it. The event ended, the crowd thinning as volunteers cleaned up. Ethan lingered outside, the October rain starting to fall, cold and steady. He hadn't planned to approach her, hadn't dared to hope she'd want to see him. But when she stepped out, locking the door behind her, he couldn't stay away. The rain soaked his jacket as he crossed the street, his heart pounding with a vulnerability he'd never allowed before. "Amara," he called softly, his voice almost lost in the patter of rain. She turned, her umbrella tilting as she recognized him. Her eyes held no surprise, only that calm, unreadable depth. "Ethan," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. "What are you doing here?" He stood before her, no designer suit, no driver waiting, just a man in worn jeans, soaked to the bone. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a humility that felt foreign but true. I had to see you," he said, his voice raw. "I've been trying to make things right. Not just for you, for everyone I hurt. But I needed to say something." She folded her arms, the umbrella shielding her from the rain, but not from him. "I'm listening." Ethan took a breath, the words he'd rehearsed 100 times spilling out unevenly. "I married you for the wrong reason. A bet, a game, a way to prove I was untouchable. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you for the right ones." His voice broke, but he pressed on. "Your kindness, your strength, the way you saw through me and still gave me a chance. You showed me what grace looks like, and I threw it away. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I'm trying to be the man you thought I could be." Amara watched him, silent, her face a mask of quiet resolve. The rain drummed around them, the streetlights casting shadows on her glasses. She didn't speak, didn't soften, but she didn't turn away either. After a moment, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, its edges damp from the rain. She handed it to him, her fingers steady. Ethan took it, his hands trembling as he recognized the weight of legal documents. Divorce papers. He'd expected them, even braced for them, but the reality stung. Tucked inside was a letter, folded neatly, her handwriting visible through the paper. He looked at her, searching for a sign, but her expression gave nothing away. "Read it later," she said softly. "And mean what you say, Ethan. Words are cheap." He nodded, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. "I will," he whispered, the rain masking the tears that burned in his eyes. "I'm trying." Amara's gaze softened, just a fraction, but she didn't stay. She turned, her umbrella bobbing as she walked into the rain, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. Ethan stood there, soaked and shaken, the envelope heavy in his hand. He didn't open it, not yet. The moment felt too raw, too sacred for the street. Back in the penthouse, he sat at the kitchen counter, the envelope unopened before him. The wildflowers Amara had once placed there were long gone, but their memory lingered. He slid the letter out, his fingers tracing her handwriting before he read. "Ethan, if you truly mean what you say, rebuild without cameras or applause. Show the world who you can be, not who you were. I married you to see if you could change, and I'm still watching. Not for me, but for you. If you can do that, maybe someday I'll see you again. Amara." The words pierced him, each one a challenge and a hope. She wasn't offering forgiveness, not yet, but she'd left a door ajar, a possibility he didn't deserve but would fight for. The divorce papers sat beside the letter, a legal end to their marriage, but the letter was something else. A call to keep going, to prove himself without reward. Ethan folded it carefully, his tears falling silently, masked by the rain still dripping from his hair. He looked out at the city, its lights blurred through the wet window. For the first time, he didn't see a chessboard to conquer. He saw a world he could rebuild, one quiet act at a time, just as she'd asked. The rain-soaked letter from Amara sat on Ethan Cole's nightstand, its edges worn from months of being unfolded and read. Rebuild without cameras or applause. Her words had become his North Star, a quiet command that guided him through the wreckage of his old self. The man who'd once thrived on bets and headlines was gone, dissolved in the wake of her departure and the truth about her father's death. Ethan had vowed to change, not for her, not anymore, but for the peace he'd glimpsed in her grace. Now, a year later, he was still chasing it, one deliberate step at a time. Ethan vanished from the social scene that had once defined him. The tabloids, starved of his presence, moved on to fresher scandals. He sold off his luxury assets. The yacht, the vacation home in the Hamptons, even the penthouse where Amara's wildflowers had once stood. The money funded a new venture, the Cole Housing Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to affordable homes in underserved neighborhoods. No press conferences, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, just contracts signed and blueprints drawn. He worked from a modest office in Brooklyn, a far cry from his glass tower, surrounded by a small team who cared more about impact than image. The work was slow, unglamorous, but it changed lives. Families moved into safe, affordable apartments in the Bronx, where Anthony Thompson had once worked. Community centers sprang up, offering job training and after-school programs. Ethan poured himself into it, learning the names of tenants, listening to their stories. He didn't flaunt his wealth or charm. He showed up, sleeves rolled up, ready to build. The guilt over Amara's father still lingered, a quiet ache, but it fueled him rather than paralyzed him. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially kids from Harlem, Amara's district. At a local youth center, he met teens with big dreams and bigger obstacles, their eyes sharp with ambition but wary of trust. He didn't preach or posture. He shared his mistakes, his failures, the cost of his arrogance. "You don't need to win every game," he told a group one evening, his voice low but steady. "You just need to build something that lasts." They listened, some nodding, others scribbling notes. One kid, a lanky poet with Amara's fire in his eyes, reminded Ethan of her so much it hurt. Word of Ethan's transformation spread quietly. No headlines, just whispers in Harlem's community circles. Stories of anonymous donations, rebuilt playgrounds, families given a second chance. Amara heard them too. At first, she dismissed them as rumors, her heart still guarded from the man who'd laughed at her pain. But the stories persisted. Ethan Cole, living differently, refusing interviews, shunning the spotlight. Her cousin, who worked with Clara, mentioned seeing him at a food drive, hauling crates in a plain t-shirt. "He's not the same guy," her cousin said. Amara's skepticism softened, but caution held firm. Words were cheap, as she'd told him. Actions took time. A year after their rainy confrontation, Amara was invited to speak at a community summit on economic justice, held in a Harlem auditorium. Her speech was about empowering youth, her voice steady and passionate as she shared stories of her teens breaking free from cycles of poverty. The crowd was rapt, their applause warm, but as she scanned the room, her gaze caught on a familiar figure in the back. Ethan. He stood alone, dressed in a simple sweater, no entourage or fanfare. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. He didn't smile or wave, just listened, his expression a mix of pride and humility that stirred something deep in her chest. After her speech, the crowd milled about, networking and chatting. Amara stayed on stage, answering questions, but her mind was on him. When the room cleared, she stepped outside, expecting him to be gone. Instead, he waited by the entrance, hands in his pockets, the autumn air crisp around him. No rain this time, just the glow of streetlights and the weight of a year's worth of change. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but clear, "you were incredible up there." She crossed her arms, her guard still up but softer now. "You're here." "Why?" "I wanted to hear you," he said simply. "I've been following your work. The youth center, the kids, you're changing lives. I'm proud of you." Her eyes narrowed, searching for the old Ethan, the one who'd played games. But his gaze was steady, unguarded, no trace of the smirk she'd once known. "I heard about your foundation," she said, her tone cautious. "The houses, the mentoring. People say you're different now." "I'm trying to be," he replied, his voice low. "Not for the cameras, not for applause. For me. For the people I hurt, like your father. Like you." He paused, his breath visible in the cool air. "I don't expect you to trust me, Amara. I just wanted you to know I'm still rebuilding." She studied him, the man who'd once been a stranger in a suit, now standing before her with nothing to prove. Her heart tugged, a mix of hope and wariness. "You read my letter," she said, not a question. "Every day," he admitted, a faint smile breaking through. "It's why I'm here. Not to win you back, just to show you I'm trying." Amara's expression softened, but she didn't move closer. "Keep trying, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not for me. For them." She nodded toward the auditorium, where her teens' voices still echoed in memory. "That's what redemption looks like." He nodded, accepting the challenge without protest. As she turned to leave, he called after her, "Amara." She paused, glancing back. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick, "for seeing something in me worth saving." She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Keep building," she said, and walked away, her silhouette fading into the Harlem night. Ethan stood there, the weight of her words settling over him. He didn't chase her this time. He didn't need to. The closure wasn't in her forgiveness. It was in his own evolution, earned through quiet, steady work. He turned back toward the city, his heart lighter, his purpose clear. The Harlem night was alive with the hum of the city, but for Ethan Cole, the world had narrowed to the moment Amara walked away from the community summit. Her words, "Keep building," echoed in his mind, a challenge and a lifeline. He'd spent a year rebuilding, not for her forgiveness or the spotlight, but for the man he wanted to become. The Cole Housing Foundation was thriving. Harlem's youth were finding their footing under his mentorship, and yet Amara's faint smile lingered like a promise he hadn't earned. As he turned to leave, the weight of his quiet redemption felt both heavy and hopeful. Then he heard her voice. "Ethan." He stopped, heart lurching as he turned to see Amara approaching, her silhouette framed by the streetlights. Her coat was buttoned against the autumn chill, her glasses catching the glow, but it was her expression, soft, unguarded, that stopped him cold. She stepped closer, her gaze steady but warm, no trace of the caution she'd held moments before. "You did it," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet pride. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "So did you," he replied, the words raw but true. "You saved me." For a moment, they stood in silence, the city's pulse fading around them. Then Amara gestured toward the street, a small nod. "Walk with me?" He nodded, falling into step beside her. No cameras, no entourage, just the two of them, their footsteps sinking on the damp pavement. The air was crisp, the Harlem skyline a mix of old brick and new hope. They didn't speak at first, the understanding between them heavier than words. Ethan felt the weight of the past year, his guilt, his work, her letter, settling into something new, something real. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low. "No bets this time." Amara glanced at him, her lips curving into a smile that held no trace of the pain he'd once caused. "Only love," she said, her tone light but certain. The words landed like a vow, simple and profound. Ethan reached for her hand, tentative, half expecting her to pull away. But she didn't. Her fingers laced with his, warm and steady, and for the first time in years he felt anchored, not to wealth or power, but to her. They walked through Harlem streets, past murals and corner stores, toward a community site where the Cole Housing Foundation had just broken ground. It was a modest project, affordable apartments, a playground, a space for kids like the ones Amara mentored. Ethan didn't say it, but every brick laid there was for her father, for the lives he'd once ignored. Amara squeezed his hand, as if she knew. Days later, the press caught wind of their reconciliation, a quiet ripple in a city that thrived on scandal. A reporter from a local outlet dug deeper, uncovering a bombshell that no one, not even Ethan, had seen coming. Amara Thompson, the plus-sized bride, once mocked by tabloids, had inherited her late father's shares in a rival development firm. Anthony Thompson's small stake, overlooked in the chaos of his death, had grown with the company's rise into a billion-dollar corporation. Amara was now wealthier than Ethan had ever been, her fortune built on the legacy of the man he'd wronged. The revelation hit the headlines like a spark. Harlem social worker outshines millionaire ex-husband. Reporters swarmed, one catching Amara outside her youth center. "How does it feel?" the reporter asked, microphone thrust forward. "To marry the man who once ruined your family?" Amara's smile was calm, her eyes steady. "Revenge changes nothing," she said. "Redemption changes everything." The words spread, quoted in articles, and whispered in community circles. They were a quiet rebuke to the world's cynicism, a testament to the path she and Ethan had walked. Ethan read the story in his modest Brooklyn office, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She'd known about her wealth all along, he realized, had carried it silently, just as she'd carried her pain. And still she'd chosen him, not for his money or his name, but for the man he was becoming. The final image of their story wasn't in the headlines or the gossip columns. It was at the community site in Harlem, where Ethan and Amara walked hand in hand, not as millionaire and maid, but as partners in purpose. The groundbreaking ceremony was small, no cameras, no fanfare, just neighbors, kids, and volunteers cheering as shovels hit the dirt. Amara laughed as a team tossed confetti, and Ethan caught her eye, his heart full. The skyline stretched behind them, a canvas of possibility, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he belonged.